Great. And Jane's already thrown in the chat a link to the agenda. Good morning, everybody. It's a meeting of the Vermont Climate Council. We actually have 2 meetings this week. We have some work to do. Thank you, everyone, for being up for a little extra work this week. We've extended today's meeting out a half hour than what it originally was in your agenda. Again, this is the steering committee's suggestion of how to handle the pending items that we didn't get to in December. Jane threw the agenda in the chat. I'll throw it one more time just for people who have been coming late. Secretary Clauser, is there anything you'd like to say before we get going, or and I can walk through our agenda?
No, good morning, everyone. I know we have a lot to get to today, so I'll let you get right to it, David.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. All right, so here we go. This is what we're going to do today. We've got 3 things we want to work on today. The resilience priorities that came out of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, that's a response to the letter that we received from the speaker, that you all as a council received. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is the draft legislative report that annually needs to get sent on the work of the council in climate action. And the third are the transportation recommendations that came out of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. We think we're going to need the 2 hours to do that. I will note for all of these, we have the possibility and the expectation that we can make a final determination on Friday. The reason we do that is because in our process document, we've said for things of substance, we like to have 2 opportunities for you to look at it so that we can have a conversation, get feedback, confirm we've got the right feedback, make those changes, and then show up and look at it again one more time and make a decision. So that's why the Friday 11 a.m. meeting is there. As you can see in the agenda, if we get to a place where people are feeling very comfortable, we should not feel inhibited by saying, we actually feel really comfortable about this, and we're not going to need that Friday conversation. So let's keep that in mind, but we want to make sure that we have the opportunity, particularly if there's significant feedback, that we can name that feedback, make those changes, look at it again, and confirm on Friday. Okay? So that's what we're trying to do today. And before we go any further, any questions about today or sort of this bigger picture of looking at these 3 items, confirming points of feedback, and getting ready to make a decision on Friday? And steering committee members, if I mischaracterized what the intent was there, please jump in. Okay. Great. I'll try to keep us on track. The first thing we need to do, as always, is the minutes from last meeting. They're linked right there in the agenda. If anybody needs a moment to look at them, I would say probably one of the most important parts of that about the minutes was capturing the agreements around biomass. All of those agreements from those minutes have been incorporated into a new and final document on biomass that has been linked in the report, the legislative report. So I'll just flag that as that's one of the important components of those minutes from last week. Any concerns about the minutes from last month? Any concerns, friendly amendments?
David, just one correction I put in the chat about attendance. So whoever is finalizing those minutes, I was not in attendance, but I'm listed.
On the 18th?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Let me make sure we make an updated version of that and correct the attendance. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other concerns about the minutes from last meeting? Okay, great. Hearing no request for additional time or any concerns, let's treat those as approved. Okay, great. So why don't we jump right in then? Our first item here are the resilience priorities. And here, I'm going to turn it over to the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee to describe the process by which they got to this document that's linked in the agenda. Again, that's a document you've had since the December meeting or prior to the December meeting. That one hasn't changed. But let me turn it over. Who is going to step up and speak for the Rural Resilience Adaptation? Who is here? I'm just looking. Paul, are you going to do that? Excellent.
Paula was our point person.
Excellent. Paula, let me turn it over to you. Let me know if you want me to share anything on my screen or whatever is most helpful, the way you want to describe this process.
I'm unmuted. Okay, sorry. I was trying to figure out if I was muted or not.
Oh, good. You have a presentation. Perfect.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. So I basically what the committee wants to do is sort of like recap what was in the letter, what the specific requests were, and how we responded to it, including the process and the product. So I'm just gonna do a refresher in hopefully about 10 minutes. I'll share the details of the subcommittee's proposal that we think might need the most attention. And then, as David was saying, we'll have dialogue today. We'll probably do some edits, and then the final is potentially ready for Friday or for possibly the next council meeting after that. So just to recap, here is what the letter looked like. Long, detailed, and with some very specific requests from us. So I just wanted to highlight, basically the context of the letter was that the speaker was thinking about the summer floods in particular, and she wants to focus on collaboration around like solutions for resilience and adaptation. So she acknowledged that there's a lot of work already ongoing, but she had a request that was specifically for the Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee. And she was talking about pathways for adaptation and building resilience in communities in the built environment, which is what that subcommittee is responsible for. It's calling on the council to make the recommendations, and they were requested ahead of the next legislative session. Unfortunately, that has already begun, but we'd like to sort of motor ahead and do this as quickly as we can so that there's something that can be used potentially soon. She had 4 categories that she was asking for feedback and recommendations on. So community business and residential toolkits, support for like making decisions about adaptation and relocation, things for some adaptation strategies for prioritizing funding, and additional state capacity that might be needed. And here we are. She's calling on us specifically to make these recommendations. So when the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee met, this was kind of what was on our mind. We wanted to know what was urgent and what was actionable that wasn't already being worked on. We looked back at the Climate Action Plan, and we looked at the section that the subcommittee had been responsible for. And just to refresh your memory, or if you're new, the CAP is set up with pathways and then strategies and then actions. And so we were trying to focus on actions that had already been crafted that we could highlight as like bringing to the top for the next thing. There were 50 actions that had not yet been taken or had no information. So what happened is over the summer, early fall, the Climate Action Office was applying for some federal money, and this climate pollution reduction grant, and they asked other members of the administration to just like fill in which things had happened and which hadn't. So we started with about 50 of those where no action was taken or there was no information. We ultimately narrowed it to 7. So other things that we put in the letter aside from that, we talk a little bit about what's already in progress, which is a lot. If you look at the legislative report, it's really well summarized there. And then we also added something that she did not ask for, which was 2 fundamental considerations that we felt were super important to have sort of like underlying everything. And that's an inclusive all hazards approach to adaptation and resilience, and just understanding the urgency of addressing more than disasters, like sort of cascading economic impacts that climate change is going to have. So here's how this was our process. We had 3 subcommittee meetings. We did 2 online polls between meetings to help like filter out what was kind of like going to the bottom and rising to the top. We had a letter writer working group that had several meetings in between those meetings. And that was me, Allie Webster, Marianne, and Andrea. And then also being super supportive of this process was Catherine Morris from CBI. And she just like held the process so beautifully for us. And along with Marianne, who was like setting all the agenda and, you know, just kind of like really keeping us focused and moving. And then David Dean was super helpful as a former legislator to help us kind of craft things in a way that would be most readily sort of digestible and actionable for the legislators who are super busy. So here is just some of the stuff from the body of the letter that we wanted to highlight. So there's a list of ongoing work. There are a bunch of attachments to show what is already happening. And then we put a strong recommendation in there, partly because of David's suggestion that like just really absorb everything that's in these attachments. Like we're summarizing it for you, but it's really important to know sort of like what's already going on. And then here are the 2 fundamentals that I was talking about before. So we're urging an inclusive all hazards approach, and also urging them to consider cascading and longer term impacts of a warming climate. There was one place in the letter where we broadened the scope of what the speaker had asked for. And then there was also a place where, yeah, we broadened the scope in 2 places. Sorry about that. So she had asked for community business and residential toolkits, and we felt that was a little bit too limited of a term. We wanted to be a little broadening it out to talk about resources more generally. And then she also asked about adaptation strategies prioritized for federal and state funding for disaster recovery. And that seemed backward looking instead of forward looking. And it seemed, so we decided to talk about forward looking things. So here's where we started. There was a lot. 4 pathways, 16 strategies, and 95 actions altogether. This is what the matrix we were looking at looked like for just pathway 1. So our job to narrow that down, that process was held so well by Catherine and Marianne. So what we did is that we looked at existing actions straight out of the Climate Action Plan, as I mentioned before. We were looking for things that were urgent, actionable, and equity and justice centered. And we wanted to have only a few, but we also wanted to have at least one in each of the 4 categories that I showed you that the speaker requested. And we also wanted to kind of get the most for our money out of this. So cross-cutting benefits and co-benefits for all of the groups that the speaker had asked us to prioritize, which would be businesses like towns and communities, and also individual, you know, like homeowners, renters, or, you know, people without homes. And then we also wanted to be sure that what we were recommending, like the actions we were pulling out of the CAP, were actually within the legislature's jurisdiction. Some of them are more related to regulation rather than legislation. So there were 2 important decisions that we made in developing the priority tables that we wanted to call your attention to. The first one is, I told you that we wanted to focus on actions from the CAP. But as we went through the process, we realized that all of the stuff about weatherization, electrification, and utility upgrades that we wanted to talk about was sort of like competing for which was the most important. And we realized that it would really be, it would make more sense to elevate that to the level of the strategy that was in the CAP. So you'll see here that the equitably expanding access to programs is at the strategy level, not the action level. And then we also went beyond the CAP language with wording of that we generated for further considerations. Just because the CAP is from 2021, a lot has happened since then, and there are things that were, more limited than maybe we would want them to be right now. Here is just an overview of the 4 categories and the 7 total priorities. So under community, business, and residential resources, we have that strategy about equitable expansion of weatherization and other programs. We have expanding eligibility for flood adaptation tax credits, and then an audit of existing residential building codes for resilience requirements. The second category, support for decision-making and relocation assistance. So we chose 2 actions there: expand relocation assistance for mobile home parks and identify mission-critical facilities and ways to reduce their disaster vulnerability and risk. And then the third column there has 2 of the categories, strategies to prioritize for funding, and then additional state capacity. And we have 1 action under each of those. So yeah, I guess that's it from me. I'm gonna stop my share for now. And also, maybe I'll be able to lower my hand at this point too. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you have any questions, David's gonna sort of get feedback, and also other people who are on both the letter writing group and the larger subcommittee can speak to most questions probably.
Thanks, Paula. Fantastic. Okay. Well, with due respect to all of your fellow counselors, that was probably the most and clearest, best counselor presentation that this council has ever had. So thank you, Paula, for doing that. I really, really appreciate the clarity of that. All right. So what's our job right now as a council? As a council, we should be asking the people who are involved in this work, Paula and others, any clarifying questions you absolutely need to ask so that you feel comfortable saying yes to this. So that's one thing. And the other thing to do is, if folks have friendly amendments to what's in that document, the language of it, or other things, this is the time to do that over the next 20 minutes we have, right? So I would encourage folks in reacting to that really clear presentation, and particularly if you want to pull up that final slide again, if anybody needs it, not right this second, Paula, but I think that final slide was a very helpful way of saying this is where you got to. Any questions you have that you absolutely need to ask so you can feel comfortable saying yes, and any friendly amendments or edits or changes you would want to put on the table to make this a stronger response to the speaker. So I'll start there. We'll do it in either order: questions or friendly amendments. Liz?
Hi, it's so minor that I'll just stick it in chat. But first of all, totally agree, very clear presentation. And I do support the narrowed recommendations toward the end. I'll put in chat just a friendly amendment on the weatherization and other energy related services, just so that the idea of ensuring that the electrification and utility upgrades for consumers makes it into the actual further considerations language, specifically thinking about the electric panel upgrade funds, for example, that are available in the program that may at some point be expanded, as well as other upgrades we've talked about. So I can stick that in chat. I don't believe it would be anything other than a nice clarifier. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. Okay. Great. We'll put that in. I'm going to be making a list. You know how sometimes I share my notes back? I'll share them back once we get at the end here. Jared, go ahead.
Thanks, David, and agreed. Thank you, Paula. That was a great presentation. Thanks to everybody who was involved in that process, which sounds like a great process. And I think the recommendations look great. The only friendly addition that I wanted to offer is related to the letter back to the speaker on page 1. I think it could be helpful on that list of the bullet points that list the efforts toward the goal. And then after those bullet points are listed, it says, you know, this is what should be central to considering how the priorities in this letter should be implemented. I think it would be helpful. Probably the best way to do this would be a recommendation to revise the first bullet to say the 2021 climate action plan and forthcoming updates in July 2025, because as it reads now, it doesn't strike me as immediately clear that the priorities are drawn from the first cap. It's kind of pointing to the next one and then a bunch of other kind of existing or newer documents. And I think it's probably helpful to like make really clear up front that the cap passed in 2021 is really the starting point and a central piece of this.
Would it be helpful to put that on the screen just for 1 second so everybody knows what we're talking about here? Hang on a second. That's in the actual document on the presentation. Give me 1 sec. We can pull it up because it's linked here.
Yeah, and I can write up a suggestion to put in the chat for language.
Right. So it's this bullet you're talking about right here. This
yeah.
is page 1. Help me understand, Jared, that because I'm just trying to wrap my head around it so I do the notes correctly, because this feels like efforts towards this goal include.
I would just change it to be something like that, so that we are making clear that the recommendations for the strategic priorities are coming from the climate action plan that was passed in 2021 rather than something that doesn't yet exist and is forthcoming in 2025.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jared. I'll drop this now. We can go back to that. Okay. Thanks. Secretary Moore.
Sure. I echo folks' thanks and have 3 suggestions. One is, well, in that same section where Jared just was, folks may have seen last week that the governor and the treasurer announced a joint effort to develop a resilience implementation strategy. I've dropped the press release to that announcement in the chat, but wonder if that could be added to that list of bullets as another place where work is underway. Next is at the top of page 3. I wonder if the first strategy noted there as we talk about further considerations should also include mention of the connection into the clean heat standard, which obviously has got some real implications when it comes to access to weatherization, and I think may make sense to acknowledge the work being done in that space currently by the PUC. And then the third suggestion would be at the top of page 4, related to around the language to looking to help relocate flood vulnerable mobile home parks. I wonder if there's a connection to be made there, not only to some of the Flood Resilient Communities Fund and Community Development Block grants, but also the 404 and 406 FEMA hazard mitigation grants. And probably some conversation needs to be had with Vermont Emergency Management. I don't have particularized expertise in that space other than to know that that is a funding source that we've relied on heavily to provide the bulk of the funding for that work in some of the projects that have been completed to date.
Thanks, Julie. Could I do what I did with Jared real quick and just go to that place so we can make sure we're getting into the notes? So you had mentioned on the first thing on page 1, sorry for the scroll.
Correct.
adding in a bullet about the recent announcement from the joint effort with the governor and the treasurer on doing resilience efforts, right?
Correct.
So that's the first thing would be add a bullet in here.
Yep.
The second thing you mentioned was on top of page
Top of page 3,
Yeah.
to add a reference to the work being done around the clean heat standard, because weatherization is one of the clean heat strategies that's eligible for funding under the clean heat standard. And so to make sure that connection is being made and folks don't lose sight of the fact that work is ongoing at the PUC right now in that space.
Got it. It's in that, and sorry, just to know where that, somewhere in this description of
In
sort
that
of
narrow, yeah, that
consideration.
further consideration section.
Great.
And then similarly in the further considerations around that first strategy,
Yep.
that one at the top of page 4, to have it refer to the FEMA hazard mitigation grants, section 406, 404, and 406 hazard mitigation grants. I don't know if Eric Foran's on the call today. He may be able to help with some specific words. If not, I'm happy to coordinate and follow up with him or Stephanie Smith from his team.
Thanks, Julie. That's really helpful. Okay. So, great. So those are a bunch of friendly amendments. And we're going to need to sort of agree on those, but let's keep rolling if there's other questions or comments folks have, and then we'll circle back and talk about what's been suggested. Ryan, go ahead, please.
Great, thanks. Reviewing the initial climate action plan, looking at 12 and 13, pathways for adaptation and building resilience in communities in the built environment is a separate pathway than pathways for adaptation and building resilience in natural and working lands. And so obviously the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee is likely focused on pathway 12. And so my question, well, I guess voice of support for including the reference to the Treasurer and Governor's initiative, as that includes kind of the natural and working lands focus and the resilience need there. So when I read the document, the way it's framed, my question is, at the top it says resilience and adaptation priorities from the Vermont Climate Council. Do we want to specify the resilience and adaptation priorities for the sector in which it's looked at? Because I think there's a lot of maybe strategies and pathways for natural and working lands which necessarily weren't considered by this committee. And so I guess that's my question. Do we want to specify what sector these recommendations are for? Because it is true the speaker's letter was quite narrow with what they were looking for. And so my second question is, did you discuss the intersection with other sectors? And third one is just a comment to say I very much appreciate the framing of an inclusive all hazard approach and looking at the cascading and longer term impacts, because there you certainly do mention the impacts on maple sugaring and pesticides and drought and other things that will affect farmers. So I definitely appreciate that's acknowledged. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. And that's a good segue right back to you, Paula, because that's probably the most direct question, is thinking about how this might intersect with other areas like natural and working lands that aren't so much the focus of the speaker's letter and of the subcommittee.
Yeah, so I initially raised my hand just to say that one of the actions is repeated. And so there, it looks like there are 8, but one of them needs to be taken out, which I'll take care of just in case anybody else noticed that. So, but to the question of the ag and working lands, we talked about how the speaker had asked specifically for what was under kind of the RRA's sort of purview. I think it would be a really good idea to kind of like reinforce back that there are other sectors where this work needs to be done, and that there may be opportunities to sort of like, again, kind of like get more for our money in terms of pointing out where there might be cross-sector synergies. So I don't know if anybody else on the subcommittee wants to speak to that, who was, like Marion, maybe more part of the kind of filtering out process.
Great. Other thoughts on that? Because that one in particular, it sounds like it's a tricky little overlapping thing, right? The speaker asked for something. We know that it's relevant for natural working lands, for farming, for other stuff. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let me just show my notes, what we have right now. And let's see if anybody has concerns about doing these kinds of changes. And I think also those who are involved in the work can help respond a little bit if there's some clarification that could be helpful. So here's my sort of punch list of friendly amendments. Make sure the electrification language, that might not be the right word here, but you put it in chat. There was like a couple words we want to make sure we don't miss. I hope everybody takes a look at that, at what Liz put in the chat. So that's one. On page 1, talking about that first revived bullet with Jared suggested additional language or changed language to make reference to the initial, this is actually called the initial climate action plan. Also on that bullet list, make reference to last week's announcement from the treasurer and the governor. And Ryan made that point as well towards the end, like that helps signal that there's some broader issues there too. Again, this is after what the subcommittee worked on, but you're the council, you could add this in here at the last minute. Page 3, include a reference to the clean heat standard work that's ongoing at the PUC. Just show that you're aware of that, and that's also an important piece of ongoing work. Top of page 4, making a reference to those FEMA funding mechanisms. I might be writing this incorrectly, so somebody can correct me. I'm not personally understanding this. And then specify perhaps that more clearly that this is coming out of the Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, and signaling that there are other sectors where these kinds of conversations and priority setting needs to happen, particularly around natural and working lands. And just show that we're paying attention to that. And then there's a typo in there that can get fixed where one action is repeated. All right, so that's what I wrote down as you all were talking. Rich, I see your hands up.
First, I guess I want to join the other voices in saying this is a really terrific response, and I appreciate the clarity that you've brought to it. A comment about the cross-referencing. It seems to me that it isn't just natural and working lands, but energy sector, for example, is greatly affected by climate change. And I'm sure Liz Miller would agree that electric and utilities in particular, need to be thinking about climate impacts and becoming more resilient. I know GMP and others are working on that. So, and then I have a question. The last recommendation on page 4 references a statewide policy plan for land use. And as people may know, there was a long, extensive debate in Vermont over creating a statewide land use plan. And a decision was made, and I think it's, whenever it's come up again, it's been made again, that we don't anticipate creating a statewide regulatory or zoning plan. And I don't think that's what the text here recommends. I think it recommends creating a policy plan that would guide the planning processes that are already established at regional and sometimes state and definitely local levels. And that the policy plan that's called for here wouldn't have the Climate Council recommending the adoption of a statewide comprehensive plan, but rather a policy plan with respect to climate changes that would provide guidance to existing planning processes. And I'm stating it that way in order to just ask the committee, is that what's intended?
I love that question. And I wonder if someone who is involved in the conversations, before I jump to Bram and Alice, or maybe Alice is trying to answer that, but if someone who was involved in the conversations could just say a word about the nuance that Rich is putting out there on that final recommendation. I'm going to keep sharing on the screen just for a moment, whether Paula or someone else who was in the group. Alice, was that you?
One thing I do know, working, I'm the chair of the Regional Plan Commission for Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. The other thing the Regional Plan Committee has been doing is we are involved with reviewing regional plan future land use plans. So the regional committees, like Central Vermont, Lamoille, et cetera, Addison, have all been charged with starting to develop new regional land use plans. So it's not, I mean, if you plug them all together, you get a statewide plan. But we're definitely in the regional planning commissions creating regional land use plans, if that helps to help figure out how to speak to it here in this document.
Thanks, Alice. So just to be clear, so that nuance, right? I think what you're looking for, Rich, is clarity of sort of, is there something that could be said, or other folks who are involved in the conversation, are we getting the nuance right in the language? Do we need to update the language a little bit to reflect what Rich and now what Alice is saying?
So, I think the language is okay as drafted, and it states that the legislature should determine to what degree they want to change the existing legal structure of planning.
Right.
But, and which is always the case. I'm just trying to, add a little clarity to the words that are there. That to me, it reads well. It reads that this is a policy planning process that would guide the regional planning commissions and town planning commissions in their work, but it's not an attempt to create a comprehensive statewide land use plan.
Right.
And when we were doing this, David, I'm just going to jump in. I've had my hand up here for a bit, but when we were doing this, the point of the discussion was that most development occurs in the state of Vermont without 250 review. And consequently, the work that is done on town plans and regional plans never actually necessarily come up during a development board review of a 3 housing unit in some, so this was to, and I think you've caught the word, the policy, because we're not looking for a plan. We're looking for an overarching context within which all development could be looked at, which we do not have because of 250 and the historic bridling at imposing a land use plan on the state of Vermont. And while I have the floor, to Liz's point, and I'm not arguing against adding those words. Adding those words is fine, but let me see. On page 4 of the second unit down, P2 S30A 152, identify mission critical facilities. And we had an extended conversation with someone from the power industry. And this is where we put that awareness of that utilities, should be, should be considered as working on mission critical facilities. You know, poles and wires, who cares if you can generate power or what kind of power you have if the poles and wires aren't in place.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to assure Liz that we were thinking about what extreme weather means relative to utility hardening of their distribution capacity.
Thanks, David. That's helpful. Okay. Guys, we are at the end of the time we have for this. Bram, you've been very patient. I want to grab that, and then Alice, a quick other word, and then let's confirm if we're comfortable with the changes, and then we'll be able to make those changes and do a final sign off on Friday. Bram?
Can you pull back up your bullet list of
Yeah,
items?
you bet.
This will be very quick. It is just a typo. In the second bullet, you added the extra "the" in front of the wrong action plan. Stick it down on the next level, on the next line. Updates to the plan in July 2025.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Got it. Okay. And Alice, anything else you want to mention?
Yes, very quickly. When we start discussing Act 250, we should be aware of the new study and the new Act 250 recommendations that are just ready to be, maybe they have been already, but NRB did a big study on Act 250, and some of the changes they're suggesting are quite significant, I think. And what I'll do is I'll go through my copious open tabs and find that study and put it in the chat for everybody to look at. In terms of what it's also really meant to do is to address forest fragmentation and natural resource areas. And in terms of that section of Act 250, your regional planning commissions doing these new land use plans are the lead in that. The other is a tiered structure, which I think you should look at. One more point is,
and super quick, Al, sorry to be jumping in. We got
that's okay.
a ton of
One
stuff to
thing
do today. Yeah.
that I'm running into, and I hope what happens is that there's consistency in cooperation and communication between the different agencies charged with different parts of flood mitigation.
Thanks, Alice. Okay. Just to finish this up, I also noticed in the chat, Allie Webster, you had put a specific request. I want to capture that here. And so I'm just pasted it into my list here. So I want to make sure that if we do these changes in the document, folks are going to be feeling comfortable on Friday to say, double thumbs up, we're good to go, right? So if there's any last challenges with this right now, this is, even though we're a little over time, I'd want to just make sure folks are comfortable making these changes. And if there's anything else that's mission critical to change, let's do it right now. David, is that a new hand?
Yes, it is. Remove the word statewide. I don't care what you call it. Don't call it statewide.
Where is that word?
Just that directed at policy, not planning. And
yeah. Okay, got it. Okay, and again, that's in the observation category, not in the change the language category. Okay, anything else? Super. All right, wonderful. Good amendments. This looks great. I will save this. This will go into the meeting notes, and you'll see these changes show up in the next version of this when we meet briefly on Friday. Okay. Jane, I cut in 7 minutes into what we're going to do on the draft legislative report, but let's pivot over to that. And here I'm going to turn it over to Jane, I guess, to walk us through what's in that report and things that are important for counselors to be aware of. And then we'll do the same thing of any friendly amendments and things like that. So Jane, over to you.
Great. Thanks, David. I feel like mediocre now compared to Paula. I don't have a presentation for you all. Paula said new bar.
It's the danger of a high bar. Yes.
The danger of a high bar. Yeah. But I wanted to just briefly state the overview of why we're drafting this plan, why we're talking about the report to the legislature for new council members, and then let you all know the format that I followed on your behalf, and then really spend the time hearing from you on any edits or comments, since it's your report for the legislature. So this report is due annually to the legislature. It's supposed to provide an update on council work specifically to the legislature. This is the third one that ANR has supported on your behalf. And as such, we followed a very similar format to previous years, so there shouldn't be any surprises on what you see in front of you. It speaks to the same similar overview of the Climate Council for new legislative members who are picking up the report for the first time, who you all are, what your responsibilities are, and the timing around that. And then it goes into sort of the substantive part that gets updated every year, which is around implementation, signaling back to any of the work that happened in the legislature the previous year to move on actions and programs from the Climate Action Plan, any technical analysis studies or ongoing work related to the GWSA or recommendations from the Climate Action Plan, any updates to the initial Climate Action Plan, of which both of those have continually been focused on biomass and transportation, knowing that those were the areas we signaled in the first Climate Action Plan were not complete and needed further work. And then any next steps for the legislature to understand where the Climate Council is going in the coming year, at this time really signaling that we have a new Climate Action Plan due in a year and a half, and that the work of that is starting to take form in earnest. So I'm happy to speak to, excuse me, any of the report in more detail, but really it's your report, and I'm more than happy to just take feedback at this point and answer any questions in particular about what we have on page right now.
Thanks, Jane. Okay. So just so everybody knows, the version that was in your December meeting packet has been updated because there was 3 places where it was waiting on information.
Yeah,
and so that's been updated. And 2 of those 3 places have that information. It's in there. And the third, which is whatever the council decides on this new transportation rec, needs to get updated at the very last minute. All right, Jared, go ahead, please.
Thanks, David. And first, I want to thank Jane for the work in pulling this together. I think there's a lot of really good context and information throughout it. However, there are 3 instances in the draft that I have significant concerns about. And so I want to kind of point to where those are and suggest possible changes. So the first, I don't know, David, if it's helpful to kind of pull up the document and look at it.
Yep.
Yeah, the first is on page 5, and I just put the language in the chat that I think is concerning. And I'll give folks a moment to read that language. And then I want to put it in the context of, whenever I'm looking at questions like this, I always try to start with what does the law say? And so I want to put in the chat directly from the Global Warming Solutions Act, what the GWSA requires regarding rulemaking. And to me, there's a really important distinction here. The GWSA talks about updating rules to ensure that the 2025 greenhouse gas emissions reduction requirement is achieved. My reading of the report that came from the Energy Futures Group that included the thermal baseline, the updates to the baseline analysis, was that in a best case scenario with full utilization of all IRA funds, IIJA funds, other funds, that it would be possible to meet the 2025 requirement. But that was not a prediction that it was certain to happen. That in fact, there is a line in that EFG report that is missing from this summary that I think is really important context. I will put it in the chat, and I think it should be added to the report. Specifically, without additional program and policy support, compliance with GWSA emission reduction requirements is unlikely. Now, you know, I think it's just clear that there's a difference of opinion between the agency and at least with me. I don't know if others agree with me. One simple fix to this would be to say, and I still think there are other changes that are needed, but in terms of the first language that I put in the chat, we could change it from saying, for this reason, the agency does not need to promulgate any additional rules before July 1st, to saying, for this reason, the agency does not believe that it needs to. I am not comfortable signing on to that interpretation because I think it's wrong, but I think it's a fair statement that that's what the agency itself believes. And then the second piece, which is also on page 5, is summarizing the EFG report, and it says this. It says the final report found the cumulative impact of recent state and federal funding and rulemaking initiatives narrows the gap between the emissions reductions projected under current conditions and those required by the GWSA relative to both 2025 and 2030 climate pollution reduction requirements. That after that paragraph is where I think it is necessary to
Can you say
add
that page again, Jared?
this.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was at the bottom of page 5, I believe. Let me see the final report. Yeah, it's the end of that second to last paragraph on that page.
Right here?
Yep.
I'm in the right place. Sorry.
Yep, you're hovering over it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so that sentence, I think after it needs the added context that I just pasted in, which is the additional line from that report. So to say, however, the report also states that without additional program and policy support, compliance with the GWSA emission reduction requirements is unlikely. So those are the two issues that I have on page 5. And then I also have a concern with a bullet point of the summary of the thermal report on page 7. Specifically, this bullet point, which says that, however, as we learned in the presentation to the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, that estimate did not include the most current and up-to-date and accurate estimate from the EPA in terms of their new adopted social cost of carbon. And so I think that bullet point should be deleted and instead have this language, which was shared with us on the call and is more up-to-date and accurate, shared instead, which is that utilizing the EPA's most current social cost of carbon, every modeled set of pathways to meet our economy-wide emissions reductions is estimated to result in net positive societal benefits between now and 2050, ranging from about 2 billion to 3.5 billion. That latter part of that is a direct quote from the lead author of that study, David Hill, when he presented to the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee.
Okay. All right. So we got, just to be clear, we got 3 things here. 2 of those 3 are in the section around rulemaking. And one of them is about, if we're going to say something like, the agency doesn't believe that promulgating rules by 2024 or July 1st, 2024, put that on the agency and say the agency believes that. Okay. So you as a full council don't have to say you believe it as well. And then the second part of that was adding another sentence in there that says, without additional program and policy support, compliance with GWSA emission reduction requirements is unlikely, right? And
Yep.
then skipping down to where we are right now, deleting that third bullet and replacing it with what you put in the chat.
Yep, that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Thanks. All right, that's really helpful. I see a lot of hands, so let's get going on the hands. I'm happy to share the screen or drop it. I'm going to drop it for now. Joey, you're up. Thanks.
Thank you. And thanks, Jane and the team who put this together. I think it's, as Jared said, I think there's great stuff in here. I generally support what Jared had recommended. I think in terms of, you know, the sentence about the agency says that we're on track to meet the targets. I think we haven't seen that yet. So I think it's really important that this is what the agency is best based on information that you have. I think the greenhouse gas emissions inventory is the sort of guiding, you know, sort of barometer of our progress. And it shows at this point that we're not on track. I'm very optimistic and I want to believe that we will get there. So I think it's important. That change is important. I also know that, and maybe this is not super important, but the thermal analysis, the report that we're leaning on to sort of highlight that we are making progress, which is great, was largely a thermal sector analysis and looking at 2030 and outward, not at 2025. I think there are pieces of that report that we can pull, but I think it's just important that maybe we reference that analysis was largely a thermal sector analysis that did look a little bit more broadly, but
can I stop you for 1 second then, Joey? Like, would you make a suggested change to language there?
well, maybe on the top of, you know, engage the contractor, reassess and update the projections of Vermont's progress, reducing climate pollution. I mean, to largely look at thermal sector, but also to help inform, you know, updating the projections. I think there's good stuff in that, but it wasn't a tool designed to answer 2025 in particular. It's helping do that. So maybe.
Yeah. So greater clarity about the purpose of that contractor and that the contractor helped. That wasn't the primary focus of the work of the contractor. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, it was largely tailored to do one thing, which it did well, but it's not as focused on 2025 and far more focused on thermal sector than economy wide. But we are gleaning some good stuff. And I think it's great that it shows that we're making progress towards 2025. So I would just lastly say supporting generally what Jared had put forward and wonder about one sort of a little additional small change to add, just largely pointed towards thermal sector.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joey. That's helpful. Rich?
As Jared points out, the text could be improved to reflect what the mitigation committee heard and what the EFG report concludes. And so I support, in general, the recommendations that he's made. And you know, with respect to the agency believes or what have you, I think my general point is, you know, not to, you know, pick an argument with the agency on this, and I'm sure Secretary Moore will have something to say about it. I would like to just observe that the council hasn't heard the evidence really that would allow us to state this conclusion. And so I think the council shouldn't be stating it. And I'm fine with the agency concludes, the agency states, the agency believes, but it's the agency that is making the statement here, not the council. And, you know, and I say that in a friendly way. I'm not trying to have a fight about it. I just think we haven't actually gone through the process to make that conclusion ourselves.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, supportive of that change from Jared then. Yeah. Secretary Moore.
Sure. I'm comfortable also with that first change that Jared proposed. I think that's reasonable. And appreciate sort of the framing Rich provide, which is that we haven't brought that fully to the Climate Council yet. I guess I would offer then I think that same logic needs to be extended to the language Jared suggested about the social cost of carbon. That is an area that the Science and Data Subcommittee has discussed previously and voted on an approach to. And so I'm not sure that referencing changes made by EPA that were mentioned in the narrative given by EFG during their report out, but not in the report itself, is similarly inappropriate to include in the document. And then finally, just want to reflect that the business as usual case update that was done as part of the thermal sector work, or the thermal sector analysis that EFG conducted, they subcontracted back to the Stockholm Environmental Institute for who did the BAU work as part of our pathways analysis. And it was a comprehensive update for 2025. So I can't support the suggestion Joey made because the BAU is parts of that were then pulled into the EFG report, but the BAU analysis itself was a comprehensive update. And then finally, the language around on page 18 of the EFG report that Jared references, I had read the report, and it may be we have to go back to EFG for clarification, but that statement applies to the 2030 target, not the 2025 target. I just pulled up the report for myself and can see that it's not clear, but I absolutely read that differently and am not comfortable sort of agreeing to that edit absent having clarity from EFG about whether that statement was specific to 2030 or intended to include the 2025 target as well.
Okay. Okay, so that's really helpful. Allie?
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to also draw attention to a line from the EFG report that I'll put in the chat along the lines of if LMI households do not receive sufficient incentive support, it will be difficult to meet the GWSA requirements. So keeping that in mind, I thought it might warrant making a change to, and now, sorry, I just lost it. In the bulleted items of the key conclusions, maybe adding some additional text to the fourth bullet, stating that the importance of where incentives specifically need to be going.
Can you say where that bulleted list is under which key conclusion? Sorry, so I can jump
Yeah.
in.
Yes, just a second. So it would be page 5.
Page 5? Okay.
Is that right? Right of the bullet right above number 4, agricultural sector emissions. So I can think about a little bit more what that language would be, but I welcome other suggestions there to expand that to really indicate the incentives. Let me wordsmith a little bit more, but that's the area that I wanted to highlight.
Okay, great. All right. So let's just check where we are then, because I think we may need to do some further thinking on this just a little bit. And oops. Let me share my notes again, as I typically do. I just want to grab Allie's in there, put that in there. Okay, so the challenge we have is there seem to be on some of these some questions about whether we want to do this or not. So we're going to have to do some quick temperature checks with all of you about this. These are my notes. The one where it seems like everyone who spoke is perfectly comfortable doing it is under the rulemaking section, put that in the agency's, attribute that to the agency, because that is not the council saying it, the agency is believing it, etc. So that one seems to be no problem. These other 2 bullets in the rulemaking are more problematic, there's difference of opinion, that's all. For one of you, it's important to clarify that this was primarily about something else and it provided some insight into GWSA. Julie says, actually, it was a comprehensive business as usual review with the subcontractor, so that's not actually sufficiently accurate. So this is not seeming like something that feels comfortable for everyone. Let's talk about it and figure out what to do. Also with this one, adding this additional language about without additional program policy support, unclear if that's talking about 2020, 2030 or 2025 or what's that's really referring to. So we need to clarify that if everyone is going to feel comfortable putting this in the report as well. Same with this one, where if I understood you correctly, Julie, you were saying this is sort of like not in the report. It was in sort of verbal. These numbers were in kind of like a verbal presentation. It feels a little weird to put it in now. And I'm not quite sure, Secretary Moore, if you have a suggestion to address Jared's concern about the way that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not comfortable deleting the bullet because the bullet is what the report actually says. I think we could potentially add Jared's context, specifically if there's a reference we can point to about where those numbers are documented. But it may be in their final presentation materials, but I don't see how we can delete the bullet that actually reflects the language in the report.
Okay. Okay, so is it a fair statement then it's like probably best to keep what the actual report says. If we're going to add something else, let's include a link to that reference. Okay, Jared?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is mostly a reflection of the fact that the EPA was going through a multiple year review to, look through all the research and analysis to update this figure, and it was updated while EFG and SEI were doing the report. So it's really a timing thing, and I'm just uncomfortable including a conclusion that's no longer current or accurate. So I hear what Secretary Moore is saying about not wanting to include something that was shared verbally and isn't in the written text of the final report. To me, the easiest thing would be to just delete that bullet point. But if folks want it in, then I do think it needs the additional context that would say, however, basically the point that I put in to make clear that estimate is using outdated assumptions relative to what the EPA found.
Is there a way to do that sort of respects the need to be able to reference that clearly, Jared, so that we can, if you want to make reference like, hey, there's been new information even since that report.
I mean, maybe we can just link to the presentation to the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee and say, as shared by the lead author of this report in the presentation to the committee on X date, which you can see, at this time marker on the video. The other option would be to just ask EFG to, I think the contract isn't at an end, but the other option would be to update that language in the report to reflect what was shared with us verbally with the more recent EPA data.
Okay. I wonder sorry, Bram, I can do this one more time to you, but Secretary Moore, are you going to comment on that specific issue?
Yeah, I guess I prefer to just delete it at that point. Like this, It's going to get complicated and we're way in the bowels of things here. So I'm happy to just remove the third bullet and not have any commentary there.
Okay. Jared, does that seem like a good way forward then? So we're not writing this up.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, great. Bram?
I was just going to suggest something similar to what Jared suggested, which is whether we can ask EFG just to put in writing what they presented to us, which is simply a statement. The report says this, EPA has updated the social cost of carbon using the current, here's what it would be. And then we would have sort of an official report to the council from EFG utilizing the current numbers.
Okay. For the purpose of this report, delete the bullet and then, like Bram, what you're saying, actually get the thing right in the final report kind of thing?
Unless EFG can do that quickly, like shoot them an email and have them respond in writing by email this afternoon. But otherwise, yes, delete and incorporate the new, the updated in future work.
Thanks. Secretary Moore?
Yeah, just our contract with EFG is ended. And so I don't think they can update the report at this point. The other piece I think that we need to not lose sight of is the Science and Data Subcommittee reviewed the social cost of carbon information before and made a recommendation to the full council that then adopted our approach to the social cost of carbon. And so I don't necessarily want to upend the process we used previously, appreciating where the EFG statements came from. I think it would benefit from discussion by the Science and Data Subcommittee before we start incorporating those numbers directly into our work.
Okay. All right. I don't want to keep going on this if we're comfortable just deleting the bullet, and there seems like there's work to do on that. So I don't want to keep rolling forward on that. I do think we need to sort out this and figure out what that is our actual reference to. It sounds like, you know, maybe this isn't needed. I don't know, Joey, I want to circle back to you hearing what you heard from the sort of and I'm trying to track the chat as well. But so let's do one at a time. First, this. Does anybody know what this is actually referring to? Can somebody pull up that? So Jared, if you want to have this in, we need to make sure that we know if it's referring to 2025 or 2030.
I mean, I think it is helpful to know what it's referring to, but I think it is worthwhile to keep in, even if it is just a reference to 2030. I tend to assume that it's both because it's requirements plural, although that could be 2030 and 2050. But we're in 2024, and in order to make an impact on ensuring that we meet emissions reductions for 2030, I mean, I always just go back to, in order for changes to show up in the data, it requires rules to go through a rulemaking process, which is often, you know, a long process. Those have to be approved by the legislature. They have to go into effect and be implemented, and it can take time to shift markets so that you see an impact. So even if it was just 2030, I think it is an important thing to make clear to the legislature that additional action is necessary to ensure that we meet these requirements. Because if we don't do it now, we're not going to be, it's not going to be possible, or we'll have missed a window of opportunity to ensure that we meet the requirements for 2030 in addition to 2025.
Okay, but just to be clear, we're talking about the rulemaking section in the conversation about rulemaking for 2024, right? So I think that was what I was understanding from Secretary Moore, and Julie, you have your hand up, so maybe I'll just turn to you, but like.
No, that was the point I was going to make, that this is, to the extent this is specific to what needs to happen by July 1st, 2024, which is the GWSA is requiring that review of meeting the 2025 climate pollution reduction targets. I don't think it belongs in that section.
So if Jared, I wonder if you think it's an important message, maybe it fits somewhere else.
I do, and I'm happy to. I do, and I am happy to follow up and work to get additional clarity so that we can revisit this on Friday. But I'm not.
How about this though? I'd love to solve it now. Is there a way, like, if that's a message you're eager to get from the council, right? That this is a storyline from the council you want to share. Where is that going to fit in this document, right? Because it's not the message for the July 1st, 2024. It sounds like.
I'm not sure that it's not.
Oh, okay. Is that what you're arguing?
Yeah, I'll just say, I don't know how others feel, but I think that there's enough important substance and enough changes being discussed at this point that I'm personally not going to be comfortable approving this document today. I know it's, for me to feel comfortable, we're going to have to do additional work, and we're going to have to come back Friday. So
yeah, I'm not saying approve
this plane right now.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm not saying approve today. I'm saying dive into this issue today so that we can figure out, like, we don't have this hanging over our heads for Friday.
Yeah, I just don't think the contractors who wrote that are on the call, so I don't think we can.
Yeah, I
Okay.
was going to say that, David. I'm happy Jane can follow up with EFG and get that clarity and have it back for us, I'm sure, by Friday, but I don't think we can have it in the next hour here.
Got it. Okay, so that's our pathway, is to figure out what their intent was when they wrote that. Okay, great. Super. June?
I just want to step back for a moment. This has been a conversation driven by two people on a council that has many more people.
Yeah.
And in my experience, when that kind of thing happens around drafting, it is an indicator that the people who are engaged on the point have very strong views that are coming into conflict with each other. And it's great for them to go off and work it out. But there are still many other counselors. And I've listened to both points here and have to confess that I am not read in sufficiently to be able to decide on the merits, who has the better of what argument. And so to me, that's an indicator that we're trying to be more specific than we can as a collective. And when you're in that situation, those are generally times to say less rather than more. So that my suggestion would be that we consider simply not saying what is attempting to be said here, but devote more time for the council at large to better understand why these two very strongly held views are coming into conflict. This is supposed to be a report to the legislature about what the council thinks, not what Jared and Secretary Moore think.
Thanks, June. Yep. Rich?
Well, I guess I'll just tell you what I think. This section it's not in a section under, as I read the document, under rulemaking. It's under a report, a section of technical analyses. And it's just a report on what the technical analyses were and what they their general conclusions. And I don't know, I usually agree with Commissioner Tierney, but on this one, I think that Jared's language is perfectly appropriate to be inserted in that paragraph that says the report was delivered among its key conclusions, : compliance is going to be easier due to recent federal and state funding. That's just, the report says that, and we agree with that. And yet, the report also says that additional policy and regulatory support will be needed in order to achieve the GWSA goals. I don't think either of those statements is controversial. And they're both in the report. And this is supposed to be a summary of the conclusions of the report. So I think telling the legislature both things is appropriate. The optimistic side of it, and also the, well, we need to sharpen our pencils side. Those are both in the report, and they're both true.
Okay.
Rich, I usually agree with you too. It's just that we have two people who are clearly butting heads here. So it doesn't seem to be that simple. I love your, I mean, also, why are we characterizing a report? Why don't we just apply a link to it?
Right.
I dropped it in the chat.
Okay. Liz?
What June just said. I was going to suggest a way forward that would perhaps drop the last sentence altogether, which is the quote from the report, and could, I agree with Jared and Rich, lead to a totally reasonable decision to add other text from the report. If you just drop it and put in a link, which is elsewhere in the document, other things are linked, but for some reason that report has not yet been linked, let's just link it. And then I did put in chat suggested revisions to the paragraph below that to do what I think accomplishes what larger group of folks thought was a reasonable idea, which is make it more neutral and agency focused. So and Jane put the link right in that paragraph is what I mean, because that's where people are reading. So anyway, those are my two suggestions.
Great. So if I'm super clear about this, just let me, 'cause I don't want to be the one slowing you all down. But in this section around rulemaking, what I'm hearing is link the report in the first paragraph so that people can go see the report for themselves. And in the second paragraph, use the new version, potentially use the new version, Liz, that you put in the chat. Right? That essentially, and everyone can see that if you scroll back up the chat a little bit, Liz's 1237 chat, which just states the facts of what the agency plans or doesn't plan to do. Right? Okay. So that could be a pathway on this, and then we don't have to get ourselves sideways on picking pieces out of the report. Okay. Do other counselors have a view on this before we wrap this up? And then I want to just summarize the potential changes that we're going to be making here. Other things maybe that aren't this that folks had planned to raise up, counselors? Anything else on this? Okay. So let me just share. My notes are a little messy. I have to apologize because we keep sort of going in different versions on this. Let me just share my screen again, and you all can help correct me here. So this first piece, Joey, if you're okay, I'm saying probably not, because it gets into a lot of nuance that maybe it's more nuanced than we need to get into.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, it was intended largely as a thermal analysis. I know it did more. I guess my thought was it may be helpful. And I think the linking it in this section of rulemaking will be helpful. I guess my point was it was intended, designed to do one primary thing, and we're leaning into it because it provided more information. But I'm happy to let that go. I think we're figuring other ways.
That's great. Thanks. I appreciate that, Joey. Link the report in the first paragraph. In the second paragraph, actually change the second paragraph. All right. I'm putting Liz's language in here because it felt like it seemed to capture what folks were saying, and feel free to push back. I had lots of those today. And then there's a question mark whether folks still want to try to do this based on what the—
Hey, David.
Yep, go ahead, Liz.
Apologize for interrupting. I had suggested eliminating, my suggestion was based on making it as neutral as possible and taking out the "for this reason" as well.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, to take that out as well. Okay, sorry.
Just those three words. No, just those three words. Just because, yeah.
Sorry. It happened with the paste. Okay, thank you.
And David, you should take out the word "need" in that bullet too. The agency does not plan to promulgate.
Yep.
Sorry, it was problem with the pasting. It didn't get all the nice crossouts.
And finally, the word word "any." The idea was just to not try to link the two sentences as conclusive.
Okay, thank you. All right. So this feels like a pathway that may make sense, and we'll test on Friday. There is this open question whether, folks want to keep pushing to get this language in here versus just using Liz's version here. All right, let's take a few more hands, and then I want to make sure we leave time for transportation as well, folks. Paula? I can't hear you for some reason, Paula. I'm not quite sure what happened. Something happened with your headphones, I think.
Is
There you go. We got you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Sorry about that. So I'm just kind of in this place where I'm wondering why the update from the council has this information in it. This seems like an update from the Climate Action Office. So do we even need this section on rulemaking at all?
I don't know. Secretary Moore, you got your hand up.
It wasn't to speak to that.
Okay. I don't know. June, yeah.
Yeah, I'll speak to it in that that's what my earlier critique was directed at. I appear to have gotten confused. When I was saying less is more, this is the provision I had in mind, not the business about the rulemaking and whether the agency thinks it needs to do something before July 1, 2024 or not. So I don't know if Rich is still willing to go another round on that, but it seems to me we could solve a lot of headaches here by just taking this out.
Right. Because this is the agency's update, not the council's update. Right. Okay. So yeah, one is take it all out, right? Okay. Wow. Let's just sit with that for a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so we can think, unless people need to refer to it. Secretary Moore, and then Joey, you all your hands up. June, you had a hand up as well, but Secretary Moore, let me go to you first.
Sure. I was actually moving on to the next piece and following up on Rich's suggestion. My understanding, I guess, of Jared's initial comment had been to put it in the rulemaking section. If it's actually to put it down in that list of bullets about that describes the report, I'm much more comfortable with that.
Great. So you're talking about that quote from the report: without additional program policy support, compliance with GWSA emission reduction.
That language is clearly in the EFG report. And so to the extent we're summarizing the report, I think that's fine.
Right. And so that
I
would
still
go
think
down.
we would be well served to have clarity about whether it's intended to apply to 2025 and 2030 or 2030 and 2050. But in that location, it's far less problematic for me.
Okay. So that could be one highlight from that report in addition to, and there it is linked right before those bullets, right? Just to show everybody what you're trying to say, I think is down here on page, I think this is 7 or so. Here, the report is linked, and you could add a bullet with that information that Jared thought would be really important to share. Okay. Joey?
I mean, I'm open to exploring that. But I do think, because I think the rulemaking section is, I need to think about this further, likely important to include. And I would like more clarity from the contractors, as Secretary Moore and Jared are going to follow up on. But because rulemaking and our obligation as a council to think about 2025, 2030, and 2050 are intertwined, and rulemaking is intertwined with whether or not the plan adds up, it does feel like, to me, my instinct is to keep it in there and try to get that question resolved. And whether it's in the rulemaking section or moved below, I think it's an open question, but it feels like that's really important to include.
Okay. So we have a bit of a dilemma because we're out of time. And indeed, I think, as June has wisely pointed out, there's kind of like a conversation going on here. It's less about the report and more about how counselors have different views about the rulemaking that needs to happen going forward and the sort of forward-looking piece. And in our conversations so far have been kind of a proxy for that dispute, perhaps. I don't know the right pathway forward, whether it's to do, as June's saying, of less is more at this point, and if this is something that the agency is trying to communicate to the legislature about its intentions. Maybe it doesn't belong in our sort of report of how we've done as a council. So removing that is one possibility. If folks have another thought about that, I'd welcome it. If you want to make us a very small group that wants to work on this between now and Friday, I'm absolutely open to that. So we can show up to Friday and have some thoughts about what belongs in this report versus what belongs in a set of forward-looking conversations this council needs to have. So I think we've gotten as far as we're going to get, and I'd encourage folks, if you'd like to be involved in a conversation between now and Friday, I'm happy to just have a quick conversation with some folks to see if it's possible to find a pathway on this for the purposes of the report. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Jared. I'd be happy to do that. Rich. Rich, go ahead. You're on mute.
I think we're inches from agreement, and it ought to be possible to craft the language in a way that the agency would be happy with, and I think the majority of counselors would agree.
Okay. Well, how about this? How about I work with whoever wants to work with me between now and Friday, and we'll circle back and take a peek at this again on Friday. All right. Are there anything else people want to say about this before we switch gears into the transportation? Okay. Thanks, Julie. Great. All right. So the good news was on the legislative report, everything besides what we were just lasering in on sounds like it was good. Folks are feeling comfortable with. So thanks, everyone. And thanks, Jane, for drafting that. Transportation. Let's take a look at what came out of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. I will turn it over to the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. I will note that the way that this document is named, the title of the document didn't get updated before it got posted. And Joey, you had flagged this over email to me, that this name is actually the previous name when it was being looked at by cross-sector. Now it's cross-sector's recommendations for the full council's approval. So just no one get tripped up on that name, that it just didn't happen to get updated between the transportation working group and transportation little group and then the full subcommittee. But who is going to be presenting this from the subcommittee?
I'm happy to take a stab, or happy to defer to others. Unfortunately, I do not have as cogent, concise, and compelling a presentation as Paula and the resilience team provided us. Great, inspiring model and very good work. So I guess what I would say is my computer's about to die. I'm gonna have to grab my charger in just 1 second. But for the new counselors in particular, people are probably well aware that in December of 2021, when we adopted our initial climate action plan, a cornerstone policy recommendation to join a regional cap and invest program, the Transportation and Climate Initiative, sort of fell apart just weeks before we adopted that plan. And we spent then another year sort of looking at what might fill the gaps. And then the carbon reduction strategy, as required by the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, came forward. The Infrastructure and Jobs Act was, focused on requiring a carbon reduction plan for those dollars, and we agreed as a subcommittee and then as a full council to benefit from that process, to lean into that carbon reduction strategy and have it help answer, because we were unable to come up with independent funds to look at analyzing other options for the transportation sector. So we leaned into the carbon reduction strategy. That plan, the final plan, was delivered in November of 2023. It provided a lot of very good information in that plan. It did not answer what we had hoped it would answer with a level of clarity and granularity in terms of what is a proposed preferred policy or regulatory pathway or pathways to meet our sectoral carbon pollution reduction obligations in the transportation sector. as such, we worked as a transportation task group to put forward a suggested next steps and set of approaches. We brought that to the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, and essentially what we are proposing, what you see in this recommendation, is further analysis with more pointed questions related to two cap and invest programs that are one getting underway in New York and another underway through the Western Climate Initiative, to look at those programs and ask and get questions answered related to the viability of Vermont potentially participating in that, what that would mean, what would be the costs and benefits. So, and then look at other regulatory or potential complementary approaches like clean transportation standard, et cetera. So what we're essentially asking you to support further analysis, deeper analysis, to get those questions that we need answered to point towards the preferred regulatory or policy approach. But what we have affirmed, and what that analysis we were just talking about says, is we're not going to make the progress we're obligated to make for a variety of reasons unless we have one or more regulatory or policy tools that do that with a level of surety that we currently lack. So we're asking for further analysis, going to lean into some federal funding that is available through the Carbon Pollution Reduction Grant Program, and it would be a partnership led by the Climate Action Office in partnership and service to the Climate Council and us all, to get the information that we need to make a clear and best sort of recommendation for our next foot forward in this space. And I'm going to turn it over to anyone else on my team who would want to round that out while I grab my charger. I'm so sorry.
All good. Thanks. Gina, you want to say a word about that?
Yeah, I just want to say there were two important parts of the study and that Joey alluded to, and I'm sure Michelle and Andrea can talk more about. One, and this is so important, is how VTrans spends federal dollars in various programs around transit and bike ped and other programs. And it provides a methodology for how you evaluate the emissions reductions benefits of those programs. That's incredibly important, and it was very well done. The second part was to look at other complementary programs to get to the GWSA goals. And that's what we're asking for, is to look at these other policies. We need to do a much deeper dive before we roll them out to the legislature or anyone else. So that's the ask here. I just want to make sure everyone understands the first part of this program was very, very well done, and we're very happy with the results regarding VTrans's spending on transportation and climate emissions reductions.
Nice. Thanks, Gina. That's helpful. Okay, so we have a short window here to do some clarifying questions that would help folks say yes to this, and any friendly amendments folks have to this document, and in particular, the recommendations in this document, which start at the bottom of page 2. Joey, you're back.
Yes, apologies. First, just wanting to underscore Gina's appreciation for the work that went into the carbon reduction strategy and what it does provide. So thanks to the VTrans team and others who worked hard on that. It's helpful. And then secondly, just if I failed to mention this with as much precision as that I would have liked to have, what you are looking at before you is a consensus recommendation from the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, in hopes that you will support this recommendation and deeper dive analysis as a partnership of the Climate Action Office and the Climate Council.
Thanks, Joey. That's great. Bram, go ahead, please.
Yes, just would add, having been part of the group that worked on this, sort of the simple version of this is that the Climate Council, after a lot of study and work as a group, chose to recommend a cap and invest program as the key driver to reach, along with the Clean Cars 2 and Clean Trucks, the key driver to reach the required reductions in the transportation sector. The particular program we recommended, as Joey mentioned, became non-viable. And really the thrust of this is there are two other options for cap and invest, which are the Western Climate Initiative and the new program being launched in New York. And this is really a recommendation to understand the implications for our emissions and our economy of joining one or the other of those two to replace the original cap and invest program, which is no longer viable.
Nice. Nice framing, Bram. That's helpful. Secretary Moore?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the recommendations. I have some concerns about the context, and I don't know how those are best shared. I think obviously the recommendations are sort of the substance of this, and maybe deferred or would ask Joey or other members of the task group or cross-sector mitigation how they'd like to proceed. But I do feel pretty strongly about seeing some changes to the context.
Great. So good news is you feel really comfortable about the recommendations. The concern is in the preamble, the context section, you've got some concerns about the way things are framed up. Okay. How are those manifested? Can you just give us the cliff notes on those? What's the concern?
I think there's a lot more detail there than is necessary for what this is intended to represent. This is putting forward a series of recommended next steps. And I don't know that we have this kind of context around any of our other recommendations. I think it's important to note that the council took action previously that deferred to the carbon reduction strategy. The carbon reduction strategy is now complete, and here are the recommendations. And I'm not sure the rest of that material is necessary. And it feels like it gets beyond just simple recommendations.
Okay, great. Joey?
I would welcome others' thoughts, but I think our thinking around the context is that we have several new climate counselors. This has been over 2 years of sort of churning around the same stuff. And now we're looking to get to a level of clarity in service of recognizing that we need one or more regulatory or policy approaches. Cap and invest was our preferred, and that's where where we recommend focusing far more attention to get details on the two programs Bram and I have mentioned answered. So Secretary Moore, if you could put in writing, which is what I had hoped might have happened before this conversation, because I welcome input on what you would like to see, what context you would like to see removed, and why. That would be super helpful.
I can do that. I have a marked up version and can put some why associated with it.
Okay, great. Gina, and then we need to go to public comment just a second.
One thing that would be important for us, Secretary Moore, is I put myself in the hands of the reader of this document. And who is the reader of this document? Is it the council? Then you don't need all the context. If it's the larger public, I think it's been so long that it would be important to summarize how we got to here as a background piece. Now, could that be a footnote in the beginning with just a couple of sentences? Yes, but I think it's really important because I believe the reader is not the Climate Council. It's the public. And the more clear we can be about how we got here simply without beating it into the ground, I think the better the document will be.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I guess it's
knowing who you think the reader is.
I think it's the reader of the Climate Action Plan, but this is an addendum to the Climate Action Plan and not necessarily intended to be a standalone document, not dissimilar to the biomass piece that's being effectively appended to the back of the 2021 Climate Action Plan. And so I came at it from that perspective where the context really should be in the plan itself. And then the recommendations are the piece that we clearly stated in the plan we weren't in a position to make because of the timing of when TCI fell apart, and we would be coming back to it. And then we took another step in sort of putting a pause until the carbon reduction strategy was complete to see what information came back here. And now we're drawing out the recommendations from the carbon reduction strategy for what comes next. But I think that underpins my concern, Gina, is that I don't see this as a standalone piece. It's part of the climate action plan. And the climate action plan should provide that necessary scaffolding for people looking to interpret it.
Okay, so you would need some other document if it were being presented to explain to people in the instance you were having to communicate it, some kind of, and this is, I guess, a larger question for the council, is the communication strategy around presenting all your information to the public and how that's done. I think footnotes would go a long way too, but that's just my personal view in getting it, maybe some of your concerns.
So I want to be thoughtful of our time here. If there's anything else folks want to raise up in terms of friendly amendments to this document, now is a great moment to do that, so we at least know what issues we're wrestling with. Kelly, you raised your hand.
Yes, and I apologize if there's drumming in the background. That's my child trying to learn to play.
You're good.
On pots and pans. With the biomass recommendations, we also did have a context section on purpose because we wanted people to understand the context, whether they.
I'm sorry, Kelly, could you turn your volume up?
I can try. I think it might be the chat. Can you hear me a bit better now?
Yeah.
Or not?
Slightly.
Yeah.
I'll repeat as well. Yeah.
All right, hold on a second. Let me try.
And while she's doing that, I'll say what she said was in the biomass document, that white writing group included some context section before the recommendations, like a page of context.
Yeah. Can you hear me better now? Is this
Yeah.
all better?
Yeah.
Okay. So we did have context, and that was because we had discussed in our group that not everybody reading this might necessarily be fully versed in what's going on and understand the full background of what the biomass task group originally had done and all the data behind it. And some of it was footnotes, but some of it was just right there at the beginning as a section of context. So I think that's valuable for this as well on the same grounds. What exactly it says in the context section, that I think is something where we could say, oh, this is not helpful or this overstates it. And that's where I would have to leave that.
Thanks, Kelly.
Sorry.
No, that's helpful. Right. So have some context. What that context actually is probably could use some back and forth. All right. Is there anything else?
Just to be clear, I wasn't proposing to eliminate it outright, just to abbreviate it. So I think that's very consistent with what Kelly said.
Thanks, Julie. Okay. So I think there's going to be a little back and forth between a couple of counselors between now and the next time we look at this to try to see if we can balance out that context in ways that feels like we're allowing people to understand the storyline, and yet we're not going into more context that's needed for the purposes of this recommendation document. Okay. And I see some in the chat, Paula also seconding importance of context. Okay, great. Anything else about this before we finish up and do a little public comment here? Okay, great. Well, the good news there, folks, is on the recommendations, it seems like we're not getting any pushback or friendly amendments. So from the recommendation standpoint, it sounds like this council's appreciative of the work of the cross-sector subcommittee. Wonderful. All right. So this is a time for folks who've been joining our conversation today. You want to make a comment, members of the public or others that aren't counselors. Let's make a little space here. We've dealt with these three issues today: the resilience priorities, this report to the legislature, the annual report, and now just the transportation. Anyone who's been listening to our conversation today would like to comment? This is our public comment section now. I'll just give it a moment. It's a good time if you want to do it in the chat too, or chat or verbally as you wish. Or just open up your mic. Okay. I am not seeing any interest in public comment right now. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Now let's talk about what's going to happen going forward. We have an hour on the books for Friday, and we recognize that that's a last minute request. The steering committee thought it was a good idea because some of these are time sensitive. All three are time sensitive. Some are very time sensitive. We recognize when we add a last minute hour like this, there could be some attendance challenges. So please let us know if you're not able to attend on Friday, and that'll be good. And we recognize we're intruding on your schedules and your calendars. Our goal for Friday is to be able to do a final sign off on what we worked on today. We're going to do it in order. We're not going to go more than an hour. This is one thing the steering committee talked about a little bit. The resilience piece is very critical to move along quickly because the legislative session is already happening. And so that was ranked high on the priorities. The draft legislative report is also high, but frankly, you could ask for time if you wanted to. And the transportation recommendations are important and timely, although not as critical as resilience. So what we'll do is we'll try to get through all three, and our backup will be, if we have to, and we don't want to, use some of the time on the 29th to pick up what we don't finish on Friday. Our goal is to do all three on Friday and to preserve the 29th to be the meeting we want it to be, which is a great coming together in person, focusing on data and updates, focusing on our plan ahead for the next year or two. Okay, so that's my sort of riffing on what to expect going forward. And I invite steering committee members to provide any other thoughts on that. Jared?
Well stated. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we will see you Friday. Things between now and Friday. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that several of you offered to talk about that pending piece in the draft legislative report and how to handle that language. I'll see if we can get a little group going that can sort that out, at least for that group, and then test it with a bigger group on Friday. The same thing with the transportation preamble, the context setting. It sounds like Secretary Moore has some line edits. We can look at that, and then I'm happy to take, whether it's Joey or someone else, to get the altitude right for the level of context. And that can happen between now and Friday as well. And Jane, I don't know exactly when we're going to post these new documents. We will post them. It's not fair to have that meeting if we don't give you some time. So 3 p.m. on Friday. I see. Yeah, 3 p.m. on Thursday. We will need to post by end of day Thursday. We will post new documents so that you at least on Thursday evening and Friday morning have a chance to read through these changes that we will have made, if that works for everybody. Okay, enough for me. Anything else before we finish up?
Sorry,
Grant?
David, is it 3 p.m. on Friday or 11
Oh, sorry. The 3 p.m. Thursday is when we're going to meet with, I was looking at the text with Julie. We are going to meet at 11 a.m. on Friday morning as a full council. And you will have updated documents in the evening of Thursday so that if you're night owls, you can look at them or you'll look at them Friday morning. Sound good? Okay. Thank you all. I was really impressed. So many are able to make this extra half-hour work. It was needed, clearly. We'll see you Friday. We'll organize ourselves, hopefully have a nice, tight conversation. We made great progress today. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you later.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.